Hello, global gardeners, and welcome to the first show of 2025. I hope everybody had a great holiday season and a happy new year. And as we look at the calendar, this is often where many of us begin to think of the new gardening year that starts on January 1st. Now, for many of us, the gardening year is year round. We're always doing something in the garden, but when the calendar shifts to a new year, it's easy to really get to our planning and to start buying our seeds and to start thinking about what we're going to do in the garden this year. And associated with much of what we want to do is a cost. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How much should gardening really cost? Does it need to cost anything at all? Or should you just accept that it's going to be expensive and that's okay? We'll be talking about that today. I'll throw out some tips, some ideas, some philosophies, and of course, be answering your questions. I want to give a shout out, of course, to Jay and Heidi. Happy New Year to my fantastic moderators and to all of you who are checking in from all over the world. Let's start with a question that John Jude was raising about the hybrid tomato. Oh, my swarm. I haven't grown that tomato. He was wondering because we both like black crim. Black crim's one of my favorite tomatoes. It does great in my garden. But I haven't tried the Oh My Swarm. And so looking through the comments, Gina commented that Growfully with Jenna loved the Oh My Swarm. It was bred at 6,400 feet elevation and sounds great for a higher altitude or short growing season, like me at 7,000 feet of elevation here in Colorado. And then, of course, to add a little bit more thought to it, Darth X says, the Oh My tomato seeds are pricey. So let's use that to begin our discussion today. The price. Now, if you are doing gardening as a hobby, you should expect that it's going to cost you to participate in that hobby. Any hobby you have is going to cost money and time and maybe some aggravation along the way. If you're gardening for other reasons, because you're trying to grow food, you're trying to get outdoors, you're trying to do something with your family, all those many other reasons for gardening, the cost may not be as important, but it is definitely a consideration. So as we look at the Oh My tomato hybrids that we could be growing in our garden, the first question that I would ask myself is, do I need it? Followed by, do I want it? Often the answer to the first question, do I need it in my garden, is a resounding no. But the second part of the question, do I want it, is often a resounding yes. And that's where the dichotomy of our thought process in gardening really rears its ugly head. I have dozens and dozens and dozens of tomato seed packets that I have purchased over the last few years. And I have dozens of envelopes of seeds that have been given to me or that I've traded for after the few years. So, do I need to add a new tomato hybrid to my garden this year? Or should I use what I already have? So, when we look at the sheer cost, the financial cost of a garden, the answer is simple. I have plenty of tomato seeds. I don't need any more. But when we look at the enjoyment factor, which you all know is very important to me in gardening, I like trying new things. I like maybe finding that new variety that will rival my favorite, the tomatoes that do best. Black crim is a favorite because it does among the best in my garden. If I can find another tomato that gives me the same benefits, then maybe I should experiment. Maybe I should buy it maybe I should grow it in my garden. And that's a question we all have to ask ourselves when it comes to how we want to garden. This year, I'm really going to try to reduce my gardening costs by using things that I already have. That doesn't mean that I can't spend a few dollars here and a few dollars there. And I'll look into the Oh My tomato varieties, and maybe that'll be one of those things I experiment with. But for the most part, particularly last year when I grew nothing but new varieties, I found some really good new varieties. The peppers I'll be growing this year are pretty much the peppers that I grew last year, with maybe a few of the old stalwarts that I like having in the garden. I'm not planning on buying any new pepper seeds. The same with my squash seeds, and for the most part, the same with my tomato seeds. So, how much does gardening need to cost me this year? Really close to nothing. Now, this answer to the question is going to vary depending on not only how you garden, but where you are in developing your garden. So, I've had 5 years to build my garden now. I have a lot of beds, a lot of open space, a greenhouse, containers, pots. I have lots of ways to grow my plants in many different areas of my garden. So I no longer need to pay for the structure of my garden. It's pretty much already in place. That helps because, again, when I'm trying to reduce the cost this year, I don't have any of the infrastructure cost to deal with. It's done. If you are just starting out your garden and you need to build some beds, you need to get a greenhouse, you need to put in some irrigation, then there is going to be a cost associated with it. Are you going to get that cost back? And that is kind of the underlying message in today's show. Is it worth it to spend some of these costs that are often necessary with gardening? I'll use my greenhouse as an example. As I've mentioned before, it took about 20 years for me to reach the point where I could fit the greenhouse into my budget. It's an expensive greenhouse, a planted greenhouse, very hardy, durable in my harsh Colorado winters, and I think it was worth the investment. But the first year that I grew plants in it, had an abundance of tomatoes, but the tomatoes that I harvested didn't even begin to recoup the cost of the greenhouse. The enjoyment I got from being able to harvest tomatoes in November and December, you can't put a price on that. So, from a simple financial perspective, I haven't recouped the cost of that greenhouse, but it's given me so much enjoyment that I think it was well worth the cost. In the second year, the tomatoes I grew in the greenhouse helped to recoup some of that sheer financial aspect. And now, this last year, the third year, another great year. It will probably take me about 10 years growing the tomatoes and the peppers and the strawberries and the figs that I have in my greenhouse to fully recoup the cost. But that means after the 10-year point, everything beyond that essentially is profit. It's a harvest that I don't need to buy from the store. It's an adequate savings on all levels. And the rest of my garden is the same way. All of my raised beds that I built were pricey in the beginning. They have since repaid for themselves. Every single bed that I've grown plants in, I've harvested enough to justify that initial cost. But it takes a while. It takes a few years to reach that point. So, how much should it cost? I love my raised beds. I love creating the soil in my beds. I love a lot that the raised beds can give me. But you don't need to have raised beds. If you've got good soil, or it's easy for you to amend the soil that you have, you can grow in the ground. You don't need to grow in containers or grow bags or raised beds. And by growing in the ground, it's essentially no cost at all. These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and these are the things that we need to think about as to how much we are willing to spend and whether that cost is beneficial in our garden. Tennessee Nana says my biggest expense last year was for water in July and August. And that was the case for me too. I spent more in water in July and August than I did on all the seeds that I purchased for the entire garden last year. And I grew almost 50 different varieties of plants, from peppers and tomatoes to squash and melons. And that was less than the amount of water that it took to grow those plants. What should the balance be? Some of you get free water. That makes the discussion very easy. But for those of us that pay for it, when I say this year, I want my garden to be as close to no cost as possible, I can do that with the seeds that I already have, with the beds that I already have, but I'm going to have to purchase the water that's going to go into those beds. So there are some of those costs that we just can't get away from. So how much will my garden cost this year? Well, when I look at the amount of water, it's all relative, but roughly I spend an extra $20 per month to water my garden compared to the other times of the year when I'm not actively growing in summer and watering. So $20, if that's the only cost that I find myself paying during the course of the summer, oh yes, that more than justifies the expense for what I'm going to gain from the seeds that I already have and all of the crops that I'll be harvesting. And as I move forward into the years ahead, what I do to save money in the future. And so as we talk about something like the black crim versus a new variety like John suggested, well, if a new variety is a hybrid, I have to buy that seed every single year. I won't be able to save the seed and grow the same type of plant. So if I like some of those oh my tomato plants and decide to continue growing them, I'm going to have to keep buying seed on a regular basis. But the black crim is an heirloom tomato. It's open pollinated. I can save those seeds and grow the plants at no cost to me at all. And in fact, I've been doing that for years. My black crim tomato seeds that I used the last time I grew black crim were seeds that I had harvested from the previous year that I had grown black crim. So how much should it cost for the seeds? If it's an open pollinated plant, you can save the seeds after that initial purchase and never buy again. If it's a hybrid that you like, I love the Sun Gold. It's a hybrid. I have to buy it. My granddaughters love Sun Gold tomatoes, which is why I'm willing to pay that expense. But a pack of Sun Gold tomato seeds might have 50 seeds in it. And I might germinate 5 seeds in a year, often less, but let's say I do 5 seeds and I have a pack of 50. Those seeds can last potentially 10 years. So for $3 or $4 or whatever it might be for a hybrid package, you can get years of plants if you store them in a nice, cool, dry, dark location, and those seeds remain viable for that time period. So you can see as we start thinking about some of these thought processes of the future and what we do now and how we're going to incorporate some of these savings, gardening doesn't need to cost a lot if you plan for it and if you do some of the things that are going to save you time and money and energy. A Blaze is asking, why can't you keep hybrid plant seeds? So this is a good question. You can keep hybrid plant seeds and you can plant them. The key is that a hybrid is developed from mixing varieties. So you have the pollen from plant A and the pollen from plant B, and it produces a hybrid plant. We'll call that plant C. If you save the seeds from plant C and then plant them again next year with those seeds that you've saved, the results will be plant D, E, F, G. The genetics are not stable, and you just don't know what you're going to get when you plant the seeds from a hybrid plant. With an open pollinated plant, with an heirloom plant, we'll call it plant A. If it cross pollinates with another of the same plant, plant A, or if it pollinates itself, like tomatoes are likely to do, you result with plant A. And if you save the seeds from that new plant A and those seeds are put into the garden in the next year, you'll get plant A. That's the critical difference between growing the open pollinated and heirloom seeds versus the hybrid seeds. When growing a plant that is the equivalent of an heirloom plant, like the black cram, the genetics are stable and you're going to get the same results. That's just not the case with the hybrid. Now, I have a video on landrace gardening, and it talks about actually intentionally growing plants that are hybrids and saving the seeds and then seeing what happens. And you may end up getting a plant that you like. I've used in the past the example of the sun gold tomatoes that I just love growing, and at the Galileo School Garden years ago, I saved the seeds from the sun gold. Sun gold now is deliciously sweet. It is a wonderful, smaller sized cherry tomato, orange in color. When I planted those seeds, the seeds germinated and I grew beautiful tomato plants. But the fruit on those new tomato plants, some were red, some were small, some were bigger, most were sour, some tasted downright awful, and none of them had the orange color or the size or the taste of the sun gold tomato. That's the key with the hybrids. So when you're saving money and you want to save your own seeds, you do need to be selective in the seeds that you're saving so that you're getting some of those hybrids that you're looking for. And of course, Jay is right on top of things because I've done a video on hybrids, heirlooms, organic and non-GMO seeds. Thank you for that, Jay. And then, of course, I have the video that I made last year where I talked about landrace gardening. And it's an interesting concept, and I like it. And I think it's probably most suitable, at least in my garden, for squash plants. Tomatoes generally are going to self-pollinate, and peppers generally are going to self-pollinate, and beans are going to self-pollinate. So when you save the seeds from those type of plants and you're starting with an open pollinated variety, saving those seeds is no problem at all. You just collect the seeds and you'll get the same plant the next year, most likely. But squash requires pollination from a different flower. And if you're growing multiple squash plants, you're probably going to get cross-pollination. Same holds true with melons. When you've got a male flower and a female flower and they need to pollinate, it may come from another plant. The result is going to be a hybrid, often in a garden with multiple squash plants. By planting those seeds, you may end up with something that you like, a new color, a new size, a new taste. And that's what landrace gardening is all about. So when you're looking to save cost, yeah, you can grow hybrid seeds. You just have to look at it as experimentation in genetics, and you never know what you're going to get. Serena says, I got a North Spore organic lion's mane mushroom grow kit for Christmas. Awesome. And have it set up in my dining room. Is there anything you want to add about growing them besides what the instructions say? And so the thing that I found as I've grown mushrooms a few times in recent years is they like moist and they tend to like dark over hot and sunny. And so here in Colorado, the humidity is very dry through much of the year, particularly during the winter. Right now, it's cold. it's dry, and inside the house, the humidity is quite low. And so when it comes to mushrooms, I'm not sure specifically what the directions say with your kit, but you need to mist them. You need to try to keep them in a moist environment. You might want to put the container in a large tray of water so that the air around the mushrooms tends to be a little more humid. I've found, at least for me, that that is one of the most important factors. The nice thing about the grow kits, however, is they provide everything else you need. And beyond the water and the right location and the right temperature, you really don't need to do much. So it can be really easy. And mushroom kits are one of those things that I haven't made a video about. I need to make a video about growing mushroom kits, but it's something that all of us should be able to do. However, as we talk about what gardening should cost in our gardens, they can be expensive, relatively speaking, because they've got the grow medium, they've got the spores, they've got the bucket, and usually you have to pay shipping for them to come to you. So it's not as simple just buying a package of seeds and growing them like we do in the garden. Mushrooms do take a little more money to grow as part of your gardening experience. And you should get a pretty good harvest. However, when you compare what you harvest to what you can buy at the store, you might actually be able to buy more mushrooms at the store than you can actually grow yourself. But, and this is the key factor that I began the show with, what you need, what you want, and then we'll add the third factor that I touched on briefly, what you enjoy most, and is that worth the cost? And so lion's mane mushrooms, you can't find those at a store, at least none of the stores around my area. Oyster mushrooms, difficult to find. I grew blue oyster mushrooms. I've never seen blue oyster mushrooms in the store. I grew them. They were delicious. I dried some of them. I used some of them fresh. I was enjoying blue oyster mushrooms for months. Was it worth the cost? Absolutely. Was it something I needed to do? Of course not. But I was very glad that I did. So the cost of my blue oyster mushrooms was more than what they would have been if I could have found them at a store. But because the uniqueness and the deliciousness of those mushrooms were something special, it was well worth the cost. And I'm guessing, Serena, that's what you'll find with the lion's mane mushrooms. And for the rest of you that might be thinking about trying mushrooms, try it. And if it's justifiable for you to fit it into your budget, I say go for it. But is it necessary? Probably not. That's the thing about gardeners, is we do so much that isn't necessary, but we do it because we like doing it. And even when we're not sure it's going to work, it's still worth the cost. It's still one of those things that we want to keep trying. Gina says, North Spore Spawn may be my biggest expense this year. I'm trying to grow their wine caps in my wood chip pathways this winter. It's too dry here in summer and fall for mushrooms. And so I love that idea. And so, yeah, you can get the spores for different mushrooms and try inoculating your garden, particularly wood. The thing about mushrooms, so the fungus that is the primary growing part produces a fruit. And so the fruiting body is a mushroom. So you really need to think about the growth of the plant underneath. And the fungus that's growing in our soils and throughout our gardens is going to be looking for woody materials primarily. Compost is primarily bacterial based, but the fungal growth in our gardens is primarily based with the woody products that they're looking for. And so growing them in a wood chip pathway is exactly the right place to be putting those. Now, the thing about putting mushrooms in your own garden is when the conditions are right, you'll get the fruit. The fungus should, in most cases, grow in the ground with few issues. As long as you keep the soil moist, and as long as the temperatures are right, and as long as it's a variety that can handle your winters and your summers, the fungus is going to grow in your soil. The question is whether it's going to give you the beautiful wine cap mushrooms. And as long as you start experimenting a little bit and try figuring out what conditions are best, you should be able to get harvest. Now, the thing about the mushrooms, and so it kind of ties in with the open pollinated varieties that we're growing and saving the seeds. Once you have that fungus established in your garden, you can expect that it will stay in your garden as long as the conditions are right for that particular growth. So when it sends up the fruiting body, what that is not just something for us to eat, but that's how it propagates. It sends out spores from those mushrooms that then spread across the soil and will create more fungal networks. I see that in my garden all the time. I've talked about it. I've got videos and I have Instagram photos that I show the mushrooms growing in my garden. It usually happens in late spring after we've had a really heavy rain. The soil is warm but not hot. The nights are cool but not cold. And now it's moist. And I have mushrooms exploding everywhere in my garden. I love it. That's because I know those fungal networks are in my soil. It might happen again a few weeks later if the conditions are right. And then I usually don't see mushrooms again for the rest of the summer. So if you're trying to grow an edible mushroom, be aware of that. It's often like other plants we're growing in our garden. You're growing something like melons. They grow all summer long, and then you only have a week or two of harvest time, and it's done. The mushrooms are pretty similar to that. They're growing underground for months and months. And then you might only have a week or two of harvest time, but take full advantage of that, because that's one of those things that you can add to your toolbox in your garden of those new things to try. If you can get some mushrooms from somebody in your area that is growing successfully a mushroom that they can eat and use in their kitchen, ask them for some of those, because if you can get those mushrooms right away, you can take them back to your garden and actually spread the spores that are inside the mushrooms. And you may actually be able to inoculate your soil and grow some of those mushrooms in years ahead. So I need to make more videos about mushrooms because I love mushrooms and I love what happens with the mushrooms in my garden, but I haven't got the videos yet. So maybe you'll see that this year. Brian's Garden says, between growing comfrey, raising worms, making hot compost, and leaf mold, my costs for gardening are minimal. Awesome. And that's why I wanted to start the year with this discussion about how we can bring some of the costs of gardening down while we acknowledge some of the costs that are always going to be there. So I've got comfrey. Let's see, I added a couple comfrey. So I think I've got I've got 7 comfrey plants that are growing in my garden this year. I will probably propagate some more and move them to new areas. All of that has cost me nothing. The very first comfrey that I put in my garden came from root cuttings from a different comfrey. So I've got 7, maybe by the end of the season, 10 comfrey plants at 0 cost in the garden. Very easy to do. The worms that I have videos about, my vermicomposting, had an initial cost. So I bought a pound of worms, but once you put them in a nice home and feed them, they'll repopulate and you can move them to new beds. So that is an initial cost. I think a pound of worms now is about $30 or $35 on Amazon. That's one cost. If you do it right, you never need to spend anything on your worms ever again, as it sounds like Brian is doing. Composting should be material that you're not purchasing. It's the material you have throughout your garden and coming from your kitchen, along with the leaf mold, leaves that fall from the trees. These are all ways to recycle material in your garden and then use all of it back in your garden. So A great way to save money is by recycling the organic materials, using the leaves as mulch or turning it into leaf mold as a soil amendment. And I've got videos on leaf mold. I love leaf mold. It works great. This year, I'm planning to use some of my leaf mold in my potting mixes, which I haven't done a lot of, but I've got so much leaf mold. I'm going to use it in place of the cocoa coir and use the leaf mold as a replacement for that. I had to buy the cocoa coir, but I don't have to buy the leaf mold. So something that I used to pay for that had those initial costs, I can now use something else to replace it with and continue doing the same things, continue seeding up and potting up and growing everything that I'm growing with the seeds that I already have. You see how this can become one of those things that when you develop the experience, when you seek to learn about some of these methods, and then you practice them and get all of that experience and expertise, gardening really doesn't need to cost anything. I see that Tony from Simplified Gardening is signed on. Tony's got wonderful information on his channel as well. Growing in an allotment, though there's been some changes that he talks about in his most recent live stream. But when you have a plot, a big garden, it doesn't need to cost a lot because over time you learn how to manage a space at very little cost. So Tony has in his allotment, you'll see this in some of his videos, an amazing irrigation system. Thousands of liters of water that he collects from the sky and saves to water. So I began the show talking about how I have to pay for water. Well, if you can set up a system like Tony has, you don't need to pay for water. You just collect it from the sky. Key difference between Wales and Colorado is the amount of rain we get. I get virtually no rain during the summer months. And of course, because we don't get rain, the little water we get is regulated and we're not allowed to set up a system like Tony has. But if you can, that's one way you can save on one of those costs. So it's incredible what options many of us have if we're able to take advantage of it. Big Will Dog, Happy New Year to you. I started my initial worm bin with 3 cups of red worms from Wally World. Other than that, I think I got started pretty cheap. Sweat equity is valuable. So great way to look at it. So when we talk about the costs, the initial cost, the initial financial cost is an important factor. You do have to weigh in the sweat equity. What are you willing to do in your garden to save money, if that's your goal? And if it's not your goal, so be it. There are some beautiful gardens here in Colorado Springs. And I go on garden tours every year. A number of different organizations have garden tours. And so one of the tours I like to do is a pond garden tour. And so it's a company that sells you all the materials to have beautiful waterfalls and big ponds. And then they put together a tour of all of the ponds that they've done most recently. Setting up a waterfall and pond system can be very expensive, especially when you pay for another company to do it. And many of those setups are so big that the people that have them are paying for workers to clean it and maintain it. Beautiful. I don't necessarily see that as a gardener taking on a new task. I see that as landscaping. And just like you might pay someone to cut your lawn, you might pay someone to prune your trees, you might pay someone to clean your pool. It's the same basic idea. If it's something you want and you like having and it justifies the expense, go for it. I've always been the type of gardener, however, to try to do some of those things, but do it myself, to use my own experience and my own muscles and sweat to build whatever it is in the garden. I've got my beautiful gazebo in the garden. I've got my beautiful greenhouse in the garden. I could have paid for someone to put it all together. They came as kits. I did it myself to not only save on the expense, but to have bragging rights to some degree. And a lot of those bragging rights are fully internal. I just look at it and say, I did that. And I feel good about doing that. And so the sweat equity was priceless because there was no financial cost and the enjoyment is immeasurable. So that's how I garden. I've built all of my beds myself. I built all my pathways myself. I've grown almost all of my plants from seed, and the bigger plants, many of them I took as cuttings or volunteers and potted them up. So I have a huge garden, with the exception of the materials like the wood and the metal. Everything else came at essentially no cost because I was willing to put the labor into it. That's a balance that you have to determine when you answer the question, how much should gardening cost? If some of the activities that are required in your garden require additional help, maybe you can find a friend to do it. Maybe you can find a volunteer to help you out. Maybe you have to pay for it. Those are things that all of us have a different answer when we look at what we're going to do in the garden and what we can afford to do in the garden. So consider some of those things as you are putting together your plan for the next calendar year and some of the things that you want to do. Tony says time is the most expensive part of any task. If you can do that, it will benefit you. Completely agree, mate. That is the thing that I like most about gardening. I love the planning. I love even more the building. I like getting out and constructing. And when you see the big project I have going on this year, and I've got the fence posts that are in place next to my greenhouse, when you see the result of that little garden by the end of the season, I know I'm going to be amazed. And I can only guess at what you'll think about that project. I love doing those things. So I'm willing to pay for the materials. It's worth the cost to me for me to be able to get out there with my hands and my labor and build something that I can then stand back and say, I built that. My garden's getting close to the point where the big projects are pretty much done. I've got a couple more. Next year, I have a wall that I'm going to build. The year after that, maybe I've got some fencing that I'll do. So I'm always looking for that new project. But for the most part, I can just sit back and enjoy the garden. So when we talk about front loading the costs within a garden, you front load the building of the beds, you front load the construction of a pergola or a greenhouse or whatever you're having. And then you never have to pay for those costs again. Your labor is similar. You have to front load the labor within your garden as you build those beds, as you build those structures. But then you don't need to do that again. Everything is built. And then you can focus on what I consider the easy labor. Putting a plant into the ground, piece of cake. Sowing seeds, even easier. Watering, you got a couple options. I love hand watering. I love getting out close to my plants and communing with the growth in my garden. But you can have an irrigation system and the whole thing is automatic, even easier still. So front loading the cost and the labor is part of gardening. But if you do it right after that, the enjoyment factor is what makes it all worth it. And that's why we want to keep doing it. Gregory says, I have some gardeners from Vietnam and they keep it really simple. Seeds, a hoe, a watering can, good soil, and labor. That's it. What else do you need? That right there says everything about gardening. You don't need all the fancy tools. You don't need all the fancy equipment. You don't need the latest hybrid plant necessarily. Keeping it simple can be a wonderful way to enjoy gardening and also save money in the process. So actually love that idea. Big Will Dog saying many people learn the value of hard work from different ways. For me, a Marine father, New Jersey ROTC, and then the Air Force ensured my grandfather's example took root in me. There you have it. And I've got a lot of that in my past as well. And maybe that's it. Maybe we can say that it's our experience with life. It's things like the Air Force that I did as well, and the ROTC, and the lessons from our fathers and our grandfathers and our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts and our uncles. But I also see the lessons I've learned from my children and my grandchildren. All of that works to make us who we are and what our ethic is. And so I'm willing to do the work because of everybody that came before that taught me the things that I know now. But I also want to do the work as a lesson for those that will come behind me, all of my grandchildren. And so I know my granddaughters in particular, when they come to the garden, they've seen the work involved. And they're young enough now that they don't necessarily correlate what they're eating from my garden with how much effort I put in. But I agree with you exactly. In years to come, they may use my work ethic to help mold their work ethic. That's what's so wonderful about the garden, is there's lessons that can span generations if you take the right approach. So am I willing to pay for some of those things in my garden to get the project done? Absolutely. It's worth the cost because of those potential generational lessons that will be coming that I'll never see, but they'll be there. And I think that's just so easy that it's something we can take advantage of. And I hope you begin to take some advantage of some of those things. And John has a good point. Gardeners usually have great work ethic and they want great fresh veggies. And so gardeners, yes, it's harder to garden than most non-gardeners realize. And so they see we gardeners out in the garden doing a wonderful job, getting great results, and they go, oh, I could do that. But they don't. What they don't see is the sweat, the heat, the wind, too much rain, not enough rain, insect pests, animal pests, all the potential damage, choosing the right varieties, giving them the right amount of water, amending the soil, using fertilizer if you don't have amended soil. All of those things are work, and they take some knowledge and experience to get right. So to be a successful gardener, I completely agree. You have to have a good work ethic because it's going to take years, and it's going to take a lot of work in those years to actually get to the point like I'm saying. I want to sit back and enjoy. I'm going to relax, take it easy. That's not discounting at all the hundreds of hours of effort to get to this point. It's just part of the cost. It may not be a financial cost, but it's definitely worth the cost. Gardens Happen says, mentioning all that kind of makes me want to make a video on it. Do it. Check out Gardens Happen channel here in the next couple of weeks. We'll see if there's a video about that. I like the idea. And that's the idea. If you're thinking about making a video, if you're thinking about talking about this topic with somebody else, if you're thinking about trying something in your garden a little bit differently, then we're all on the same path. And that's really the great idea for the day, is to try to put it all together and try to make it work to our benefit. And that's what I always try to do, of course, is try to make it beneficial, primarily for myself. Now, of course, I might make a video and talk about it so that you can benefit from it. But these are the kind of things that I think are important that we move forward with. Liz G is saying, how do I propagate berry bushes then? Have you done videos on that? So I do have a video on propagating my raspberries. And yes, that's not a bush, that's a bramble. So when we talk about bushes, I don't have a video yet. Now I am doing some cuttings as we speak in my basement on how to propagate bushes from cuttings. And so that video may come out. And when we talk about fruit bushes in particular, depends on the fruit bush, but cuttings are often the best way to propagate some of those plants. Some of them will root. So I started a video and didn't like the way it turned out. Maybe I'll try to do it again this year, but my currants are that way. So the reason I didn't like the video is because my one currant bush in particular is sending up new plants from around the mother plant. And so a lot of fruit bushes will do this. They'll send out the roots, and then when it gets to the end of the root, 12 inches, maybe less, maybe more, a new plant will prop up. My aronia have done the same thing. And so what I've done is to pot up those new plants that appear and then put them in a new area of my garden. So I find that to be the easiest way to propagate, is to just dig up a plant that's growing from the mother, and now you've been able to propagate that bush. The cuttings take more time, a little bit more effort just to make sure the lighting and the temperature and the moisture levels are right. That's what I'm doing now. Maybe you'll see both of those videos in the year ahead. But look for that. Look for the plants that are growing around the edge of the mother plant. And you may find that you're growing one of those fruit bushes that makes the propagation easy by just digging it up. And so along my fruit trees, I've got a row of the currants that are growing that came from the initial plant. And that's what I've been waiting for to make the videos, for those plants to actually get big enough that I can do that comparison of how you can dig it up, pot it up, and then in a couple of years, what you can expect to see. So it's doable. Just observe to see if you see that happening. Some bushes as well will do the same, but they're not as obvious. So some of the new growth will appear close to the plant. You might be able to divide some of those bushes and separate them into 2 or 3 new bushes. If I do that, of course, I'll make a video about it, but it depends on the type of fruit as to which method is best. And do a little research, and you may find out, based on what fruit bushes you have, would be the best method. I love being able to just dig up an aronia or dig up my currants and put them into some new spot. It makes it very, very easy. And that's why I like to do it. The raspberries and the blackberries are even easier still. So my raspberries, I do have a video where I talk about that, as I mentioned, and I dig up the raspberries as they spread and put them in another area. Blackberries will tend to do the same. The nice thing about blackberries is you'll often see a system called layering, where you can bend the cane down to the ground and pin it in place or put a rock on top of it, and it will root where it's touching the soil. And so then you'll get a new plant. That's an option for blackberries that a lot of other fruit bushes don't have, but it's worthy of consideration. Okay, let's see. Frank says, did that with blueberries. The root sprouts. If it has roots, dig it and place it where you like it. There you go. Another good example. And my blueberry in my pot is not to that point yet, but I love that idea. And that's a great way to propagate that plant in particular. Jana says, my thornless blackberries will grow roots if the new canes touch back down in the soil. Oh, there you go. Layering. I stuck those into pots with landscape staples and cut them off when established. Worked. There you go. So you can see that there are some of these methods that are pretty prevalent in the gardening community. You just have to learn what those methods are. And so all those new currant bushes I have didn't cost anything. I bought that first bush when I moved to this house 5 years ago and put it in the ground. And now I've got currant bushes in my landscape, and we'll never have to buy a currant bush again. And I love currants, and I've had a great harvest from that plant already. It'll take a few years before those other plants get big enough for me to have more currants. But when they do, I will triple, quadruple, quintuple the amount of the currants that I'm getting and make even more currant jelly and jam. So I love doing that. And I love doing it at very little cost, which is just a fantastic way to garden. Betty Barnes is asking the laziest way to cold stratify flowers. I want the most plants possible from this packet. It's a memorial and want to share with others. The laziest way is just put it in your refrigerator. So cold stratification for most plants that require the cold need a temperature below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4.5 Celsius. Your refrigerator should be that cold, maybe a little bit colder. So the refrigerator is a great place to just stick your seeds in and forget about it. I've got flower seeds in my refrigerator right now that I'll be germinating probably within the next couple of weeks. And I put those packets in a year ago because that's just where I store those flower seeds so that they're getting easy cold stratification. And you put it in and you forget it, and then you take it out again. Absolutely the easiest way. If you want to do it naturally, and so I've done this with my cosmos, I've done this with my zinnias, I'll grow them, and then I take those seeds and just sprinkle them on the soil at the end of the season. Once they flower and set seed, I just sprinkle those seeds. All of those seeds are naturally cold stratified based on my cold winters. And then they pop up again. So I bought a pack of Cosmos seeds 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I have a video where I'd show some of that sowing in fall in particular. I haven't had to buy Cosmos since because I let them reseed and they do all of that stratification naturally. And the same with the zinnias. If it's a new plant, new seeds, and you want to grow, make sure you get the best germination, do it in your refrigerator and start them indoors. Then put the plants outside and you can save the seeds from those plants or spread the seeds from those plants to get them to do that stratification naturally. Both are easy. Just let Mother Nature do it in one case and just let your Frigidaire do it in the other case. It really is that simple and that lazy. Absolutely. June says, I would love to grow blackberries, but I'm just not ready for them yet. It's impossible for me to grow blueberries here in my low Arizona desert zone 9B. I've tried for a number of years now. You're trying. I like that. That's one of those things about gardening. And so tying that in with the message for the day, is it worth the cost to try and fail? Yes. And then you try and fail again. Is it still worth the cost? I think so. And then you try and fail again. Is it worth that third effort? Yes. Because at that point, you've either determined that it's not going to work, like maybe the blueberries in your case, or maybe there's still one more thing to try. And if you can figure it out on the fourth attempt, then yes, all of it was worth it if it becomes one of those things that you like growing. I love growing blackberries. I love picking that fresh, warm blackberry off the plant in summer and then eating it right there. It's splendid. It took me a while to figure out how to do that. And I'm still working on it. The area I have my blackberries in now is not the best area. So I was hoping to get a crop this last year. Didn't happen. But I'm going to keep trying and find a happy spot. A number of years ago, I had the perfect spot. They were beautiful plants, and I want to get back to that point. So it's experience, it's time, it's a lot of lessons, sometimes not always the lesson that you are looking for, but I think it's worth the effort and worth the cost to reach that point of having a definitive answer. There are some things that don't do well in my garden, and I know that. Sometimes it took some of those failed efforts to reach that conclusion, and other times it was just the research. I know I can't have a lemon tree growing in my garden. I can have a lemon tree in a pot that I have outside and then bring it indoors over the winter, but my winter is just too cold to ever plant a lemon tree in the ground. I know that. That comes from that knowledge that we learn about gardening. I have a pomegranate that I have in a pot that I put outside, does great during the summer, and now it's indoors to protect it from the winter. If you're willing to make those kind of efforts, you can grow some of the things that maybe you're told that you can't grow. So your blueberries may fall into that category in Arizona, is a different location, maybe better soil, maybe a shaded area, so it's not quite as hot. Is it worth the effort? You're the only one that can determine that. But if you've determined that it can't happen, that's fine. Go with it. And then look for those things that you can do. And I think those are really important lessons that we learn. And so when we share some of the discussion, and I love some of the discussions that are going on in the comments right now, it is one of those things that we need to look at some of the basics. And so I think Pat's comment is right on. A good soil test will pay off big time. Absolutely. I've talked about that. I've shown the soil test results that I've done in my garden a couple different times. I amend my soil and I do a soil test after I've amended my soil. I do a soil test before I amend the soil, so I know what my baseline is. Blueberries are a perfect example. Blueberries require a very acidic soil. If you're trying to grow blueberries and they never grow and you've never done a soil test, it could just be that the pH is wrong and that the plant just won't grow. That's one of those important factors that we can eliminate. Once you can identify the variables and you can figure out what the variable is, now it's no longer a variable, and pH in the soil is critical. This ties in with just the essence of the soil. Good soil is the key to gardening success. I've said that many times before. That's why I spend so much effort amending my soil and focusing on getting the bacterial activity and the fungal activity within my soil so that the plants do well. I don't fertilize my plants. And you can see in all my videos in the summer months, my plants are doing great. They're doing that because the soil was the focus. You can build a good soil at no cost. Even if the soil you already have is terrible, and based on a soil test, I know my soil is terrible, by adding all that organic material, doing the things like compost and leaf mold into that soil, turns it into a good soil. It takes time. It might be a few years. Gardeners are some of the most patient people I know because we recognize that it may take years to see the results of putting a fruit tree in the ground, improving our soil, propagating our bushes, whatever it happens to be. It's not an overnight solution. But I think it's worth that time. Time is a cost. I think it's worth the time to get to the point where we have that success, and it begins with soil. One of the first lessons I learned when I went through my master gardener training was that more than 80% of plant problems can be traced to the soil. So if you're having a problem with your plants, chances are it's a soil problem. The soil isn't good enough. The soil is lacking in nutrients. There might even be a pest that's in the soil. The soil has so many answers to what we do in the garden that it should be right at the top of your list for learning more about. For this year, if you're looking for a good topic to explore to make yourself a better gardener, make it soil. Learn more about soil and what you can do in your garden. And as we just talked about, a soil test is a great way to start that. Yankee Sister Homestead, Happy New Year to you. Yes, gardeners have the patience of Job in scriptures. Thumbs up. There's something to be said. That's why I think gardeners are such wonderful people, because we have patience, we're nice, we share, we have a great work ethic, all these things that we've been talking about today. Gardeners have all of it, which is so nice to be able to say, I'm a gardener, because you're telling the world that you have a lot of those attributes that gardeners just need to have to be a successful gardener. Dan Low Music is saying, I had citrus survive last winter. Almost killed it when it got down to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. That's very cold. That's about -7.5 Celsius, which is rare for Western Washington. Yes, it is. So I brought it in. It lost all of its leaves, but I milked it back to life. Good for you. Black Gumbo channel. Scott had a video where he showed some of that with his fruit trees in Houston, Texas, last year, I think it was, when they had severe cold, lost all the leaves. His plants were in the ground. It didn't quite get that cold, but that's the response from a lot of those trees, particularly citrus, is they'll drop all their leaves. They're trying to retain all that energy into the main tree. And then when the conditions are right, they survived it all along, and the new leaves will come out, and you've got a plant that's still alive. So good for you, milking it back to life. That's great. This is another one of those things, and I love doing this. When you think a plant is dead and you don't give up on it. I have an apple tree that was done for. It had been exposed to severe cold after being eaten by deer. It had started as a 4-foot tall plant, and it was 2 feet tall. And I dug it up. It was in my fruit orchard area, and I didn't think it was going to survive. I didn't want to make the effort with that plant in that location. So I got a new fruit tree to put in that spot. But I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't give up on it. So I moved it to a new area and put a fence around it so the deer couldn't get to it, and milked it back to life. And now it's actually doing pretty good. It's got some solid branches on it now. After 2 years, it's back up to that 4-foot high point. And I think probably not this year, but maybe the year after, I might have some fruit on a tree that I thought was done for. Such a great feeling to do something like that, where you have something that anyone else would have given up on, but as a gardener, with your patience and with your work ethic and your desire to experiment and not kill plants, you're willing to do what needs to be done to bring a plant back to life. So absolutely wonderful when you can brag about it, and good for you that you've got that plant, that lemon that you can hopefully harvest lemons from in the near future. Eileen D is asking, what's the best way to get rid of voles in a raised bed? Should I just empty the whole thing out and patch up the holes? Many thanks. So the best way to get rid of voles is to figure out where they're coming in. Typically, voles don't burrow very deep. They tend to stay on the surface. And so you can look at some of those actions that are bringing in the voles. So for instance, in my area, the voles, and I've got voles, and it's a small mouse-like creature, if you don't know what a vole is. They will stay below the surface, but not too far below. And so my whole garden is mulched with a pretty thick layer of wood chip mulch. That's how the voles travel. They're traveling in and underneath that mulch. So if you've got something like that around your raised bed, you might want to move away that mulch, because now you've taken away the pathway. Voles are great food for a number of predators. So they don't like crawling across open ground. So if you create open ground around that raised bed, you're deterring the voles. It's not necessarily going to get rid of them, but it's going to deter them. You can dig a trench around that raised bed and actually bury a barrier 6 inches deep, like maybe a metal edging that you might use on a pathway. You can bury that in the ground and create a barrier to the voles coming into the garden. If If that isn't something you want to approach, then yeah, consider emptying the whole thing out and now putting the barrier across the bottom of the bed. Now, voles can get through pretty small spaces, but if you use 1/2 inch hardware cloth at the bottom of your bed, that's a great deterrent. So take out all the soil, lay down end to end, side to side, a hardware cloth, and then put the soil back in. Great opportunity to amend the soil as you're putting it back in. That could potentially get rid of the voles that you have in your raised bed. I'm not aware that voles are going to climb up the side to get into a raised bed. They don't want to be exposed and they're going to move to other areas. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas of what you can do to figure out what your vole problem is going to be. A number of years ago, my wife found what she thought was a mouse that had fallen into the window well, and she rescued it and released it. And then she told me what it was she had done, and it ended up being a vole. It's not a big deal. They're part of nature. And I love the hawks and the owls and the cats and even my dogs in the garden that take care of some of those pests. It's all a balance. We don't necessarily need to get rid of them. We just need to keep them out of our beds. And that's kind of the approach I take with barriers and with the animals in my area. They do most of the work for me. And I'm okay with that. Sunset Gazing says, comfrey tea. It's like a miracle fertilizer, worth growing it just for that, but composting it too. Yesterday I was winterizing TGE in ground plants, used cardboard boxes over the comfrey. Yeah, I love comfrey too. Actually, one of my older videos, I made it a long time ago. I've got a video that shows how I make and how I use comfrey tea. And that's one of the reasons I've got 7, this year 10 comfrey plants growing in my garden, is to make comfrey tea for some of those areas where I want to give a boost to the soil. But also it's a great addition to a compost pile. Wonderful addition to the compost pile. So yeah, I love comfrey. So winterizing and using the cardboard boxes over comfrey, the root of the comfrey is so strong it's going to come back and just do fine in your garden. Even in my garden, it's going to get very cold this week. The temperatures are going to be dropping down into single digits. I can expect about 8 degrees tomorrow, I think it is. That's -13 Celsius. And we're going to have a bunch of days like that to come. Even with those cold temperatures and colder, my comfrey makes it through the winter just fine without any extra protection. Same with my strawberries, my fruit trees, my fruit bushes. As long as you choose a plant that can handle those cold conditions, it's great. The one thing I do about the comfrey, I don't do cardboard, but when the leaves die back in late fall, early winter, I leave them in place. So I let the comfrey leaves act as an insulator over the main plant. So I don't cover with cardboard or anything. I just let the leaves stay in place. And then once everything starts warming up, I remove the leaves and let the new growth pop up. And then I use those leaves as mulch around that area. Maybe add it to the compost pile. Comfrey is a great plant. I love it. It's one of those wonderful things to do. Liz G says, my tea mix is comfrey, nettles, and horsetail. Works like a charm. There you go. So I have nettles. I love nettles, and I am growing nettles for the same reason I'm growing comfrey. And I let dandelions grow for the same reason that you're growing the horsetail. It all can be made into a wonderful tea and add some nutrients to the soil. I've got a video, of course, that shows how I do that. I think the video is 2 years old now. And I mix the comfrey and I mix the nettles and I mix the dandelion all together and turn it into a tea that I can use. For the most part, I use the teas like that in my greenhouse to water the plants while they're being hardened off. Just a little bit of extra boost. I will fertilize plants in containers. So great option, absolutely great option. One thing though that I've done this year, and I talk about it, I said I was going to do it in the video where I talk about growing an herbal garden. for herbal medicine is I took all my nettles, and this year, instead of taking the nettles and nettle leaves and making a tea, I actually took the nettle leaves and made tea for me. And it's got all kinds of health benefits. And I actually kind of like the taste of nettle tea now that I've gotten used to it. So a lot of benefits to some of those plants we can use for ourselves or use them back in the garden as a benefit as well. So always good things to find if we can find the great things. And Tony's right. That's exactly why. These are accumulators. That's a term you'll see often in permaculture discussions. That the dynamic accumulators, a plant that has that big root that is absorbing all of the nutrients from the soil. And so when we talk about nettles and dandelions and comfrey in particular, they're taking the nutrients from the soil and storing them in their leaves. And so their leaves in particular tend to have more nutrients than a generic squash leaf or tomato leaf. And so that's why those leaves in particular are great accumulators and a good source for returning some of those nutrients back into the soil, be it in a pot or throughout your garden. And then the nice thing about when you make a tea with those leaves is you save the steeped leaves in water. You save the water as your fertilizer, but then you take all those leaves and stems and put them in your compost pile. There's still nutrients there, and they can still be a great source of material for your compost pile. So you kind of get a double win when you do some of those things in your garden. And I think it's a great opportunity to take advantage of if you can do that. So to learn about those multiple reasons for the plants we grow. We often are growing a plant for a particular purpose. We're growing the plant for the fruit it's going to give us, or we're growing a plant for the flower it's going to give us. Don't forget about the seeds, the stems, and the leaves, because there might be benefits to those as well. When you can find a plant that you can get all of that from, it probably has a spot in your garden, or at least a spot that you should consider for adding it to your garden. And of course, Jay is right on top of things, giving the link to my free fertilizer comfrey tea video. And so thank you for that, Jay. Right on top of things, of course. And so Jay has a good tip here directed to Robin Gardens, that the dollar store is one of my seed sources. And so as we look to the new year and we look at how we can save money in the garden, look at some of those low cost alternatives. And so when I talk about seeds, I've talked about seeds in a number of videos. One of the videos I did a few years ago was comparing the different seed sources, talking about the packets of seeds, the information that you can get from catalogs, information you get from the seed packets. And that was part of the discussion, was the cost. The dollar store seeds, almost perfect germination and great plants at a huge savings to some of the other sources that you might be getting. So I have seen some reports, and I may have experienced it, but not sure, that the quality control for some of those cheaper seeds may not be up to the standards of some of the more expensive seeds with the more prominent companies. So you may get a cheap seed packet and the plant that grows is not the plant that was advertised. That happens. But you know, some of the most expensive seed I've purchased has also had that same problem. The super hot pepper seeds are notorious for some of the sources of those seeds giving you a seed that doesn't match what you bought. So that's all part of gardening. So you can buy an expensive seed that doesn't match what you wanted, or you can buy an inexpensive seed that doesn't match what you wanted. Regardless, you've got seeds to grow in your garden. The likelihood of that is very, very small. And so consider the dollar store as an option for getting some of your seeds. When I look to this year and trying to save money by using the seeds I have, I will seek out some new seeds. I'll be talking to the members of my garden club. We've already swapped seeds on a couple of occasions. Another option, you might want to check your local library, because a lot of libraries have a seed library within the book library. And they allow you to check out seeds, grow them in the garden with the expectation that at the end of the season, you'll bring back more seeds. That could be a way to try some of those varieties that maybe you don't want to buy, and you can get them totally free. So, do you have to spend money on seeds? Of course not. There are lots of options out there, and a seed library and trading seeds are great ways to do it. If you do spend, yeah, think about the dollar store. It has to be one of the secrets of gardening, and I don't think it's so much a secret anymore, because when I am in seed buying mode and I have a general idea of when my local dollar store starts stocking their seeds, if I'm not there in that week, they're picked clean. There are a lot of other gardeners that have discovered this secret, and they're buying the cheap seeds. And when I say cheap, my dollar store was selling 4 packets for $1, 25 cents per packet. And at the end of the season, seed selling season is actually pretty short. At the end of the season, just another month later, when they were cleaning out the display that had picked clean, there were still some seeds left, and they were on clearance for 10 packets for $1. Now, they're basic seeds. There's nothing special about them. They're the kind of seeds people are already growing, which is why many of them were left behind and ready to be sold on clearance. But great option for saving some money if that's what you want to do. And so Robin Garden says, I save seeds for the Door County, Wisconsin Seed Library. Good for you. They have 8 libraries that distribute seeds for free. I think that's fantastic. So there you have it. And so check out your library. You might find something. Jen is saying January 25th is National Seed Swap Day. I was thinking about doing a video about this. And if not a video, I might do a live stream in a few weeks about this, because I've been getting emails from some of the seed catalog companies, and they've been talking about National Seed Swap Day. And so look for that. You might see some of these organizations that are setting up seed swaps in your area. And so the thing about seed swaps and the thing about gardeners, you have the gardeners who are saving seeds to give away at a seed swap. And they're not necessarily looking for seeds as a replacement. And this is what I see in my gardening club all the time. Not everybody saves seeds and not everybody swaps seeds, but the people that are saving seeds are saving enough seeds for everybody. And so even the people that are not swapping, they have nothing to give, they can still receive from a swapping event. So even if you haven't saved the seeds and you see that there's a seed swap event in your area, go ahead and check it out, because you may actually end up getting some seeds without having to reciprocate this year. If you do that, I strongly encourage that you save seeds this year so that you can participate next year on January 25th, Seed Swap Day, so that you can then be one of those givers. Great way to meet people, great way to mingle with other gardeners, and a great way to save money in the garden with seeds that are free. Great, great opportunity. And Tony is exactly right. Learning to save seed is an essential skill. It should be one of the basics taught to any new gardener. Growing your own food is great, but being reliant on big companies holds you hostage. Completely agree, Tony. That's why I don't want to buy any more seeds this year, because I've been their hostage for so long. I've had my problem with having to buy seeds, having that addiction to buying new seeds every year. And that's all part of it. They get you reliant on buying new seeds every year. I'm trying to break that reliance and trying to grow as much as possible this year without having to actually buy anything. Seed swaps, great opportunity to maybe get into that mind. Shandy's Garden says, we never mind if anybody comes to the seed swap with nothing. They always leave with a bag full. There you have it. And that's the way gardeners are. I've done so much of that uh, when you look at the tomato seeds, I've given away a lot of black Krim tomato seeds at my garden club and many other places, because how many black Krim tomato plants do you really need? And so if you just save one tomato from a black Krim plant and then collect the seeds from that, you're going to have over 100 seeds. And if you're only going to grow 2 or 3 plants, that now means you've got dozens of seeds to give away. And if you do that with a number of other plants that you're growing in your garden, the peppers are the same way. Open up a pepper and save the seeds. Some peppers have more seeds than other, but it's the same idea. Just a couple peppers can give you hundreds of seeds that you can give away. So it's not hard. And Tony's right. It's a skill. I agree. All gardeners should have that skill, because at some point you will probably have a plant that you really like and you want to keep it growing in your garden. You can buy the seeds every year, or you can save the seeds if it's an open pollinated plant that allows you to save the seeds. I love saving the seeds and storing them and then putting in the garden the next year. That's a lot of the fun that I see in the garden. So take advantage of it. DLR 978 raises a good point. It's actually exciting to see a plant bolt. Oh yeah, I totally agree. Everyone else wants to pull it, and I'm like, no. When a plant is bolting because it's too hot, it's stressed, and it thinks it's nearing the end of its life, it's going to send up that flower stalk and set seeds. And so spinach, I love seeing my spinach bolt, because I can save those spinach seeds for the next time. I love seeing my onions bolt. I got a video on the onion seeds. I got a video on the spinach seeds, because I can save those seeds and continue to grow that plant into the future. So I completely agree. When a plant bolts, the normal response is, nope, season's done. Time to pull those plants and do something else with that spot. Let it go for a little while longer, and you've got free seeds to either give away or use for yourself. So great opportunity when plants bolt. I love it. Colorado Bird Nerd, New Year, and a Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much for that donation. Happy Monday to Gardener Scott and the Global Gardeners, lurking in the background as usual and learning so much. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. You are so welcome. And I'm so glad to be back after the holidays and starting this new calendar year, to be here for most of the Mondays to come for the rest of this year, and to be with you, to spend this time with you for the 90 minutes that we have together. I just absolutely love it. So it's fantastic. John Jude says, Gardener Scott has taught me some about saving seeds. Thank you, John. Yeah, I got a ton of videos on saving seeds of all different types. In fact, some of my best performing videos are seed videos. My how to save carrot seed video has hundreds of thousands of views from all over the world, because the thing about saving seeds is you need to understand a little bit about the plant. And so, to Tony's point, it's a skill gardeners should learn, because it's not as simple as just putting the plant in the ground and expecting seeds that year. Some plants, like carrots, are biennial. You shouldn't expect carrots until the second season. And if you don't know that, you may think you failed. You put a carrot in the ground and it doesn't bolt and give you flowers. You think you aren't going to have seeds, so you pull it. You need to leave it in the ground over the winter. And there's a lot of other plants that fall into that category as well. You need to leave them in the ground over the winter to get seeds the next year. That's all part of learning. That's all part of the gardening experience. And so learn some of that. You're going to learn about soil this year, learn about seeds this year as well. And the seeds that you are saving literally will pay dividends in saving the cost of replacing those seeds in the future. So great way to do it. Robin Garden says saving seeds for microgreens is budget friendly. There you go. Same idea. since I use a lot that way. And so if you're growing microgreens, so there's a ton of plants that you could use as microgreens, and from lettuces and spinach to sunflowers and peas, you can grow all of those as microgreens. Grow them as microgreens, use them as microgreens, but let some of those plants actually mature and seed, and you'll get enough seeds for multiple crops of microgreens to follow. My carrot video, one of the things that just amazes people is that a single carrot can give you tens of thousands of seeds. A single carrot plant waiting for that second year, tens of thousands of seeds. You can see that video, and I talk a little bit about the math and just how many seeds are in each of the umbels, the little umbrella shape that the flowers and the seeds come in. It's incredible. So microgreens, a lot of the plants are the same way. You just save a few of those plants and you can get hundreds, maybe even thousands of seeds and keep your microgreen operation going and keep enjoying those plants. So such a wonderful way to garden indoors, because a lot of those microgreen plants are really outdoor plants, but you grow them indoors year round. Great opportunity. So grow them indoors as microgreens and grow a few of the plants outdoors as a seed source, and you don't ever have to buy microgreen seed again. What an opportunity. Mobius 981 says, saved my dill seeds from last year. Me too. And so I was talking earlier about my cosmos and my zinnias in particular, where I grew them and then spread the seeds around. I did the same thing with my dill seed this year. I love dill. Dill is a wonderful plant for attracting beneficial insects. And so I've been spreading dill seed all over my garden. We'll see what pops up. Doesn't matter. I got a lot of dill seeds in a lot of places because I saved the seeds, and I'm just going to let it grow as just kind of a semi-wild plant growing in my garden. Wherever it sprouts, that's where it gets to stay. I love the plant. I love the flower, and I love the benefits that it brings to the garden. So something to think about. Jay, thank you for that reminder. I'll be a guest on the Urban Gardener show this weekend. And so I'll definitely post that on my community page. The Urban Gardener has a Saturday show and a Sunday show, and I'm a regular guest once a month on the Sunday show. So look for that. It's usually the second Sunday of the month. And so yesterday was the first Sunday. This next Sunday, I'll be on the Urban Gardener show. I don't know what we'll be talking about. Usually the thing that we focus on is just answering questions. And so Enoch will ask me some questions about what I'm doing in the garden and then open it up to everybody else. So if you didn't get your question answered today, go to the Urban Gardener channel on Sunday and see if maybe you can get the question answered there. It's much more likely. It's a smaller audience, and he tries to get as many, if not all, the questions answered that pop up. So definitely take advantage of that. Riverdale Gardens, great to see you here. Awesome live as usual. Thank you for that. And offers a thank you to me and everyone else. So everyone else, of course, is fantastic on this chat every week. I love seeing you all here. It's so great to be back after the holidays and to start this new year with great potential. One of the nice things, when we talk about all the attributes that gardeners have, I think one of the best attributes that we share is our optimism. Gardeners are some of the most optimistic people I know. That's because every year we know our garden's going to be great, and we know it's going to be better than last year. And even though we started last year with the same thought, and if our garden wasn't a success, we start the year saying, this is going to be our best year ever. And maybe it will be. This last gardening season was my best pepper year ever. And I started the year saying that, anticipating it, hoping for it, and it happened. I'm hoping this year is going to be even better still. I don't know how I could top it, except that I'm growing more pepper plants of the ones that I really liked and doing the best I can to do more of what I did last year that worked so well. And so as we start this calendar year and you're looking to your year ahead, I hope you're approaching it knowing that it's going to be a great year, knowing that you're going to have success. And then, of course, at the end of the year, looking back and learning all of those lessons, it really does make it a success. You don't have to harvest to have a successful garden. You don't have to have big, beautiful plants to have a successful garden. I think the most success you can have from a gardening year is to want to do it again. Even with the failures, you've learned the lessons, the important lessons, and you want to do it again. That paints the picture of a successful gardener. I think most of you, if not all of you, can fall into that category. And I'm definitely looking forward to a successful year because I will do it again next year. Yankee Sister Homestead, thank you so much for that. So ready to spend this new year of gardening knowledge with you, Gardener Scott, and everyone. Happy new gardening year to all. You've said it succinctly, accurately, and thank you so much for that. Yes, happy new gardening year to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you here again next week on Monday. Same time, same channel, and we'll probably talk a little bit about gardening. Between now and then, as you look at catalogs, as you think about seeds, as you learn about soil, do some gardening activity this week. And as you do it, enjoy it. I'm Gardener Scott. We'll see you next week.